that we should cover. So, having said that, I wouldn't criticize a Muslim woman for not wearing the hijab in the West, because you do propel yourself straight into the front lines, short sword fighting in defense of Islam. I was a Christian all my life and nobody knew it, and I never talked about my faith. Now I'm a Muslim, the whole world knows it just by looking at my head. So it can be quite difficult or challenging in a volatile arena, but I know in my heart that it's the right thing to do, and so I wear it.
You declared Islam, or you just kept it secret?
No, I mean, people in Qatar obviously knew I was a Muslim, and I told my mother by email, but I didn't make a big thing about it because, to me, religion is personal. It is down to an individual. I wouldn't say I'm a great Muslim or a good Muslim. I strive every day to try and be a good Muslim. Some days I think I do very well, other days it's a disaster. But, you know, like Muslims around the world, it's a continual challenge, and I strive to do that. But I don't feel as though I need to shout from the rooftops about how wonderful Islam is. If somebody comes and asks me, which happens in London, you know, I can be sitting on public transport and somebody will come to me and say, why do you wear that scarf? I'll then talk about Islam. But I don't go out to people. I'm not an evangelical type of Muslim. I will go out to people. I'm not an evangelical type of Muslim. I will talk about it if people ask me.
What was the impression of the people around you, especially the close people?
Most of them were shocked. My mother and father loved the idea that I stopped drinking, I stopped smoking, I stopped clubbing, and that I started to lead
Was it noticeable that people noticed that you became another person with otherwise than your personal feeling? I mean, your outer behavior. Was it different?
Well, I stopped going to nightclubs, and I stopped drinking, and I stopped going to arenas where, you know, there would be alcohol served. So it's not that people noticed, they just didn't see me. And then the next time they saw me, I was wearing a hijab. Some of them realized that I'm still the same person. Others waited for a while to see what was going to happen. I don't know what they expected, and then they saw that I still laugh, I still, you know, have this lively character. So they were okay. Others just cut me out of their life. They felt threatened that I had become a Muslim. What was really noticeable was when I put on the hijab.
Of course,
Suddenly my parents didn't like the idea of me being a Muslim.
Were you married at that time?
No.
You weren't married?
No. A lot of my friends didn't like, you know, why are you covering your head? It was challenging,
sure,
I would say. But, you know, I still have the same political views. I've been a fighter for Palestine and Palestinian rights all my life. The views I had 20 years ago haven't changed. But now when I express them, I'm suddenly a Muslim extremist, a fundamentalist. She's, you know, one of those crazy Muslims. And I'm thinking, hang on, I said this 20 years ago, and you accepted my view. Now you say I'm a fanatic. Why? It's not me that's changed. You're the one who's changed. And it has been quite interesting, people's perceptions of me.
Do you believe there is kind of discrimination against Islam in the West?
Oh yes, we're living in a very Islamophobic world, and in Britain it's quite interesting because as a white Westerner, I never really faced any discrimination other than the usual discrimination against women in the workplace, which you know, is part of the West. I've always been a feminist and a fighter for women's rights, but I've never really experienced any discrimination as a minority group. And suddenly, the moment I put on my hijab, the attitudes started changing. People looked angry at me. Some taxi drivers refused to stop for me. When I would get into a taxi, the driver might say, "So where's Bin Laden then?" Or when I would get out, a couple of taxi drivers have said, "You haven't left any bombs in there, have you?" And, you know, this sort of constant sniping. Then there is the more in-your-face abuse. There have been people who've threatened me with violence. And for some reason, Christians, especially in Malaysia, really took against my conversion and sent me death threats and phoned death threats and email death threats. It was quite interesting. But I always work on the principle that people who threaten never ever do anything anyway, so just ignore it.
Your relationship with the British government, I hear that it happened, slight changes in this relationship before and after.
Well, I've always been someone who has believed in fighting for justice and equality and fair play. And when that hasn't happened, I have been very critical. And I have been critical of the government in the past, especially the Blair government. And one of the things that the Taliban were thinking about was maybe we can exchange her for somebody in Britain, and we can get somebody nice back and send this horrible woman back to Tony Blair. And I said to them, "You are crazy if you think you can negotiate with the British government. You know, they think that you're terrorists and they will refuse to talk to you." And one of the interrogators said, "But won't Tony Blair care that we have you in our custody?" And I said, "He will be sad that there aren't 20 more journalists like me locked up." I said, "You have done him such a big favor. He will be so happy you have arrested me and locked me up." So, no, but I was a member of the Labour Party, Tony Blair's party. And when I got back to Britain, having experienced what it was like to be bombed, I joined the anti-war movement and became very passionate as a peace activist that, you know, you cannot bomb civilian areas. And when Blair took the country to war with Iraq, I tore up my card, my political party card, and said I can no longer be with that party.
Okay, so let's back again to the issue of the women in Islam. You are a feminist. You usually defend the right of a woman. When someone tells you, now what about Islam and the women, what you're going to tell him, especially about something like hijab, like the woman right in heritage and mirath, something like marrying more than one woman. What are you going to say now, and you're a feminist?
Well, I'm still a feminist. In fact, I say I'm an Islamic feminist, which I think we tend to be more radical than our secular sisters. But the Holy Quran has, for me, a blueprint in there for women's rights and protecting women's rights. And I keep telling Muslim women, you have to gain knowledge to know what your rights are, and you have to demand your rights. Furthermore, you have to make sure your men are educated so they know what your rights are as well, and you make sure that they see that your rights are given freely.
Well, actually, I've read some funny story that when you got married, you wrote your own marriage contract because you insisted to put down your rights.
Yes.
Can you tell me this story?
Well, one of the things that I noticed is that the wife, the woman, has a right to a wedding contract. And I was reading more about this, and I thought, you know, this is where all these Hollywood lawyers got the idea from for prenuptial wedding contracts. It's all here in the Quran. So I said to my husband-to-be that I would be writing my own wedding contract, and I said it will be Sharia compliant. And
what have you written in this contract?
Well, everybody keeps saying, how much did you demand? My price was that he would teach me the last 10 surah of the Holy Quran. That is my price.
Mahr.
And while I didn't say that he couldn't have a second wife, as I say, it was a Sharia compliant contract, I said that he would need my written permission. Something I doubt I will ever give freely, but it's there. And you know, just some of my hopes and fears and expectations were written down. And what I found interesting was that as we went through the service, the imam asked me 3 times during the various procedures, do you want to marry this man? And I said to him afterwards, I said, if he'd asked me again, I'd have to say, what does he know about you? Why does he keep asking me? And this is why I get irritated when people say, oh, you know, there are forced marriages. And of course, that is not Islamic at all. And unfortunately, the media, with the Islamophobic agenda, will talk about forced marriages, violence. Unfortunately, the media, with the Islamophobic agenda, will talk about forced marriages, violence, honor killings, all of which are not Islamic and have no place in Islam.
After being Muslim, Yvonne Ridley have been known as one of the great defendants of Islam and Islamic issues, especially hijab. And there is a great story about that in Turkey. I've read that you have been prevented to make a lecture in the beginning. They wanted to prevent you from making a lecture unless you take off your hijab.
Yes.
Can you tell me the story?
That was in Istanbul, and I went into a university, and as I walked through the security, this man came forward and he told me to remove my hijab. I didn't understand what he was saying. I think he thought that I was Turkish. And the sister with me translated, and I turned around and said, shame on you, how dare you ask me as your sister in Islam to remove my hijab? And he was trying to explain that it was his job and that he had to do this. And I asked him, is that how he would defend himself on the day of judgment? And he was saying, please, you know, just remove your hijab. And I said, no, I'm not taking it off. If you want to take it off, you'll have to rip it off my head. and he looked, and I